45 is a disaster for black voters, but also Biden needs to be held accountable for whatever he says and his actions. And that's just an opinion of one man. Welcome to 2020, the year that provides yet another opportunity for America to examine and address the issue of race and the ways in which politicians treat the black voters. The recent police involved death of George Floyd in Minneapolis is evidence that racism is still pervasive and remains unaddressed. The presumptive Democratic presidential nominee, Joe Biden, stepped into a morass of racial politics when he said to a prominent black radio host, "Well, I tell you what, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or for 45, then you ain't black." Biden made the comment on The Breakfast Club toward the end of a cordial but direct interview with host Charlamagne Tha God, who invited Biden back to the show, noting he had many more questions to pose before the November elections. "It don't have nothing to do with 45, it has to do with the fact I want something for my community," Charlamagne responded. And Biden basically responded with, "Take a look at my record." Up to this point in the interview, former Vice President Joe Biden spoke about his campaign, institutional racism, and the challenges facing the black community. He also defended his record, particularly in the 1994 crime bill, which has drawn criticism for promoting mass incarceration in the black community, and he touted his support among black voters. He discussed his recovery plan and policy proposals, such as the Manifesto for Black America and his Lift Every Voice plan for Black America, which is a good conversation piece, even if it risks pandering to black voters because it is named after the black national anthem, with support for a study on reparations. The interview showed that Biden must engage on the issues that matter to black voters the most, and demonstrated the importance of the black community to the Democratic Party and Biden, the presidential candidate. In addition, the interview may have increased the pressure for Biden to select a black woman as the vice presidential candidate. Depending on who you ask, either Biden made an offensive remark, or he spoke in jest and the joke bombed in its delivery, or he spoke the truth, and Biden should be left alone, because criticizing him would only help the dumb eating breeding rednecks to help re-elect 45. They say it's also complicated, just like the history of race in the United States. Biden apologized for his remarks, saying that he shouldn't have been so cavalier, and he does not take the black vote for granted. The Florida Democratic Representative Val Demings, a former Orlando police chief who has endorsed Biden and is reported to be under consideration to be Biden's running mate, told CNN's Dana Bush on State of the Union on Sunday morning that she was glad that Biden apologized. She said he shouldn't have said it, but yet took 45 to task for exploiting this for the 2020 campaign, and insisted the squatter has a serious conversation about race, which she regarded as America's toughest issue right now. Look, let's talk about race, because we definitely need to, she added. We see it in housing, we see it in voting rates, we see it in healthcare, and we see it in education. 45, let's have a serious conversation about race in America, and how about the working for all people that yet you're supposed to represent, not just a privileged few. The black Republicans, such as Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina, criticized Biden as a condescending and arrogant, which is exactly what 45 is, while former Utah Representative Mia Love said his comments were incredibly offensive, racist, and an affront to the millions of African Americans who voted Republican in 2016. However, last week, when Biden appeared on The Breakfast Club, 45 visited a Ford plant and praised the good bloodlines of Henry Ford, an aggressive anti-Semite who published anti-Jewish rants in a newspaper he owned and was honored by Hitler's regime. Yet 45 received little scrutiny for this remark, in large part because America has become desensitized to him and his racism. Failing to address a history of systematic racism and white privileges in this country helped bring 45 and its harmful policies against people of color and America as a whole to power. That 45 is an essential threat to black lives does not mean African Americans cannot and should not hold Biden accountable on race and force him to become a better and more thoughtful candidate who is responsive to their needs and issues. Looming in the background is the sentiment that black voters, a diverse bloc and the reliable base of the Democratic Party, are taken for granted, treated as props, and provided with much more lip service and window dressing, yet offered few tangible policy gains. Efforts to lobby Biden to choose a black woman as his running mate, and the insistence he has not selected a white centrist in the mold of Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar, reportedly also being vetted, reflect in a desire among many black voters to demand more from those in leadership and power in exchange for their support. Black voters are crucial to Biden's success, with subdued enthusiasm, engagement, and turnout among this demographic threatening to derail his squatterole aspirations. One critique of Biden is that as a white person he was speaking out of turn in that interview and had no right or authority to define blackness, even as many African Americans might agree that voting for 45 was a reckless pursuit. Perhaps Biden became too familiar with the black voters and acted too much like he was one of them. Biden's latest incident isn't his first, and it reminds people of the former President Bill Clinton, who during the 2016 campaign was campaigning for Hillary in Philadelphia and found himself in a heated exchange with Black Lives Matter activists over his and incidentally Biden's 1994 crime bill. This election is about the future. They're trying to blame her for something she didn't do. So I'll tell you another story about a place where Black Lives Matter, Africa. The former president said, referring to his wife's aide's work in Africa as Secretary of State. Clinton, once described by Toni Morrison as the first black president before President Barack Obama, arguably also became a little too familiar in that exchange, sounding like a patronizing white man seeking more credit for all the great things he and his wife had done for black folks. A comparison between Clinton and Biden is particularly revealing because it demonstrates the history of bad policies that black voters have had to accept for the payoff of more diverse political representation and attention. The Clinton administration had the most diverse cabinet in history in its time and was very popular with black voters, but also enacted problematic and damaging welfare reform legislation. In addition, it backed the same crime bill Biden defended on the radio, one that devastated communities of color and which black lawmakers also supported because it's also complicated. White politicians, even those who have enjoyed and relied on black support, have capitalized on the specter of black criminality and have assumed a tough on crime stance for political gain. Black lawmakers eager to seek solutions to pressing matters in their community often supported unfortunate legislation crimes such as this crime bill, which also contained beneficial elements that helped justify the passage. Biden has a long history of ill-chosen words, so does 45, even while advocating for good policies. For instance, in 1977, Biden worried that integration done wrong would lead his children to grow up in a racial jungle. Last year, he reportedly told a group of black mayors that many black parents can't read or write early this year, which, well, technically that might be true, but still he shouldn't have said that. While campaigning in Iowa later in the year, Biden misspoke at an event offering that poor kids are just as bright and talented as white kids. Immediately correcting himself by adding wealthy kids, black kids, Asian kids, he suggested we've got to reckon a kid wearing a hoodie may very well be a poet and laureate and not a gangbanger. And in 2007, he recalled then-Senator Obama, the first mainstream African-American who was articulate and bright and clean. Statements like these have drawn apologies from Biden over the years or explanations and that they were taken out of context. Obama, for his part, said that he didn't take Biden's comments personally. It's time, however, that we raise the bar. Biden, like Clinton, presents black voters with a conflicting picture. He served under the first black president in the White House, one with a strong commitment to civil rights. However, he also recalled the days of civility when he worked with segregationists in the Senate, as if to cling to a fantasy of working together with the Dixiecrats who disenfranchised and disempowered black voters, the black people, and an even more quixotic dream of finding common ground with present-day 45ian Republicans who do the same. And his poor treatment of Anita Hill during the 1991 Senate confirmation hearing for Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas still reverberates today among civil rights and women's rights groups, given that Biden did not defend Hill against Republicans who sought to discredit her. To his credit, Biden has made some smart recent decisions, such as selecting progressive activist, campaign organizer, and a political commentator, Karen Jeanine Pierre, as a senior advisor, even as his inner circle, which is otherwise white and from his own older generation. His Lift Every Voice plan is a good start, but is only a useful starting point in addressing systematic racism. In other words, Biden must do more to earn the black vote if he wants them energized and engaged, a point Charlemagne made clear throughout this interview. Stating this obvious fact does not mean 45 will successfully court black voters. The 45 squadancy has indulged and in some cases fostered the white nationalism, racism, and xenophobia, a Southern strategy on steroids to please a dwindling right-wing inbred base. Black voters have little to expect from 45 other than more bad policy, race baiting, voter suppression, and more disproportionate deaths as he continues to mismanage the coronavirus pandemic.